When Imani discovers her mysterious new roommate is actually the CEO of the company threatening her home, her world unravels, but a deeper betrayal is about to surface. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are. Watching from today? Imani Rivers wiped away her tears as she placed the last of her grandmother's framed photos into a cardboard box. The small Harlem apartment felt emptier now, 6 months after Grandma Rose's passing. At 27, Imani found herself truly alone for the first time. "I'll make you proud, Grandma," she whispered, running her fingers over the image of the woman who had raised her after her mother walked out when Imani was just 8 years old. The rent was due next week, and Imani knew her part-time job at Cornerstone Books wouldn't cover it. She'd been avoiding the inevitable, but today she finally posted the roommate ad online. Her grandmother's apartment had a tiny second bedroom that once served as a sewing room. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. 3 days later, Imani sat nervously in her living room as potential roommates came and went. None seemed right. Too loud, too messy, too intrusive. Then came the last appointment of the day. The knock on the door was soft, almost hesitant. Imani opened it to find a tall man with dark hair that needed a trim and a scruffy beard that partially hid his face. He wore a plain grey hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. "Hi, I'm Julian Cole," he said with a polite nod. "I'm here about the room." His voice was quiet but clear, his posture slightly hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. There was something in his eyes, a sadness maybe, or exhaustion, that made Imani pause. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I'm Imani Rivers." Julian entered, his eyes taking in the modest apartment with its mismatched furniture and walls covered with Imani's photographs. He moved carefully, like someone used to navigating unfamiliar territory. "These are amazing," he said, stopping to look at a black and white photo of an elderly man playing chess in the park. "Did you take them?" Imani nodded. "Photography's my passion. I work at a bookstore during the day, but I'm trying to build my portfolio for gallery submissions." Julian smiled for the first time, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. "You've got real talent." The interview was surprisingly easy. Julian explained he was between jobs after leaving a family business. He was quiet, paid on time, and kept to himself. All qualities Imani appreciated. There was something trustworthy about his straightforward answers and lack of pretense. "When could you move in?" Imani asked, having already decided he was the one. "Actually, I'm staying at a hotel right now, so whenever works for you." Imani raised an eyebrow. "A hotel? That must be expensive." Julian shrugged. "It's temporary. I needed to make some changes in my life." 3 days later, Julian moved in with just 2 suitcases and a laptop. Imani showed him the tiny bedroom, barely big enough for the twin bed and small desk. "I know it's not much," she said apologetically. Julian shook his head. "It's perfect, really." Life settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Julian was out most days doing what he called consulting work, while Imani split her time between the bookstore and freelance photography gigs around the neighborhood. They rarely saw each other, except for occasional evenings when they'd both be home. On a cold night in October, the ancient radiator in the apartment gave out with a clank and hiss. Imani called the building's maintenance number, but no one answered. "Just our luck," she muttered, wrapping herself in a blanket, "and on the coldest night so far." Julian, who had been quietly reading in the corner, put down his book. "I can take a look at it. You know about radiators," he shrugged. "I've picked up a few things." To Imani's surprise, Julian disappeared into the kitchen and returned with tools she didn't even know she had. He worked methodically on the radiator, eventually producing a satisfying clank as heat began to flow again. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, impressed. Julian wiped his hands on a towel. "My grandfather, he believed everyone should know practical skills regardless of background." That night, they ordered Chinese takeout and talked, really talked, for the first time. Imani found herself telling Julian about her grandmother, how she'd raised Imani after her mother left. Grandma Rose used to say, "Baby girl, the world takes and takes, But your spirit is the one thing they can't have unless you give it away, Imani said, smiling at the memory. She worked as a nurse for 40 years, hardest working woman I've ever known. Julian listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and never interrupting. When Imani asked about his family, though, he became vague. "We're not close," he said simply. "Business differences." As weeks passed, these late-night conversations became more frequent. Julian was always ready to listen when Imani talked about her photography dreams or her grief over losing her grandmother. He remained reserved about his own life, but occasionally shared small details: his love of history books, a childhood memory of building model planes, his preference for corner bakeries over chain coffee shops. One night, returning from a particularly difficult day at the bookstore, Imani found Julian in the kitchen attempting to cook. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down her camera bag. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, looking embarrassed as he stirred what appeared to be pasta sauce. "You mentioned you had a tough client today." Imani was touched. No one had cooked for her since her grandmother died. "Thank you," she said simply. The pasta was overcooked and the sauce too salty, but it was the best meal Imani had eaten in months. As November turned cold, Imani noticed Julian seemed increasingly troubled. He received calls that he'd take in his room, his voice muffled but tense. Once she overheard him say, "I don't care what the board thinks, I'm not ready to come back." When she asked if everything was okay, he assured her it was just work stress. But his eyes told a different story. One evening after Imani returned from photographing a local jazz performance, she found Julian staring out the window at the Harlem streets below. "Do you ever wonder if you can really make up for mistakes?" he asked without turning around. Imani set down her camera. "What kind of mistakes?" Julian sighed. "The kind that hurt people. Not because you meant to, but because you weren't paying attention." There was so much pain in his voice that Imani moved beside him at the window. "My grandma used to say that regret is just the past trying to steal your future. Whatever happened, Julian, I think what matters is what you do next." He looked at her then, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You're remarkable, you know that." The moment hung between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. As December approached, Imani secured her biggest opportunity yet, photographing a community art exhibit that could lead to connections with real galleries. But her excitement was dampened when she received a letter from the building management announcing a rent increase starting January. "They're pricing people out," Imani fumed, pacing the small living room. "This building has been home to the same families for generations, and now some faceless corporation wants to turn it into luxury condos." Julian's face paled. "Which corporation?" "Cole Holdings." Imani spat out the name. "They bought half the block last year. My grandmother worried they'd start raising rents as soon as the older tenants moved out. Looks like she was right." Julian stood abruptly. "I need some air," he said, grabbing his coat and leaving before Imani could respond. When he returned hours later, his eyes were red-rimmed. Imani was too wrapped up in her own worries to notice. "I can't afford this increase," she admitted. "Not even with a roommate." Julian sat beside her on the couch. "You won't have to move," he said firmly. "I promise." Imani smiled sadly. "That's nice of you, but unless you're secretly rich, I don't see how we can swing it." Julian flinched but said nothing. The next morning, Imani left early for the gallery preparation. The exhibition space needed to be photographed empty before the artists installed their work. It was freezing rain, and in her rush, she forgot her umbrella. By the time she finished 4 hours later, Imani was soaked and freezing. Heading home to change before her bookstore shift, she hurried through the building's main entrance. Instead of using the side door as usual, that's when she saw it. A brass plaque she'd passed 100 times, but never really noticed. Recently, polished, it gleamed in the lobby light. Cole Holdings, established 1923 and below, in smaller letters on a newer addition to the plaque, Julian Edward Cole, Chief Executive Officer. Imani stared, unable to process what she was seeing. Julian Cole, as in Cole Holdings, as in the company raising her rent. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and searched Julian Cole Harlem. Images flooded the screen, her roommate in expensive suits at charity galas, business forums, and cutting ribbons at property developments. Only there, he was clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled, standing tall with the confidence of someone born to wealth and power. The Julian in these photos wasn't the quiet, hoodie-wearing man who fixed her radiator. This Julian was heir to one of New York's largest real estate empires. In a daze, Imani made her way upstairs. She unlocked the apartment door to find Julian at the kitchen table, his laptop open. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian looked up, confusion crossing his face until he saw her expression. The color drained from his features. "Imani, I can explain." "Explain what?" Her voice rose. "That you're actually Julian Cole of Cole Holdings. That you own this building? That you're the one behind the rent increases forcing people out of their homes." Julian stood, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's complicated." "Is it? Because it seems pretty simple to me. You've been playing some kind of sick game, pretending to be just another struggling guy while all along you're—" She gestured wildly at him. "That's not how it is," Julian insisted, his voice pained. "Yes, my family owns Cole Holdings. Yes, technically I'm the CEO, but I've been trying to change things from within." Imani laughed bitterly. "By lying? By infiltrating the very community you're destroying? I moved out of my penthouse because I couldn't stand what my company was becoming," Julian said, his composed facade crumbling. "The board and my father's old partners have been pushing these development plans, these rent increases. I've been fighting them for months." "So what? This was research? Living among the common folk to see how we live before you price us out?" The betrayal cut deep, deeper than Imani expected. She'd trusted him, confided in him, maybe even started to care for him. Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd seen a dozen times, but now seemed like it belonged to a stranger. "When I answered your ad, I just wanted a place where nobody knew who I was. Where I wasn't Julian Cole, the heir, the disappointment, the figurehead. I wanted to be judged for who I am, not my last name." "And who exactly are you?" Imani demanded. "Because the man I thought I knew wouldn't lie to my face for months." "I never lied about who I am," Julian said quietly. "Just what I do and where I come from." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not," he insisted. "Everything I shared with you, my thoughts, my feelings, the things I care about, that was all. Real, more real than anything in my other life." Imani shook her head, tears threatening. "I have to go to work. I can't deal with this right now." "Please, Imani," Julian stepped toward her. "Let me explain everything. When you get home tonight—" "I don't know if I'm coming back," she cut him off. "I don't know if I can stay in an apartment owned by someone who lied to me, who represents everything my grandmother warned me about." Julian's face crumpled. "Imani, please." But she was already out the door, slamming it behind her. In the hallway, Imani leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. How could she have been so blind? How could she have let herself trust so easily? The Julian she thought she knew, the quiet, thoughtful man who fixed radiators and made terrible pasta, had been a fiction. Or worse, a deliberate deception. As she walked to the bookstore through the rain, Imani felt something inside her, breaking. Just when she'd started to believe she might not be alone after all, the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She thought of her grandmother's words. "Baby girl, be careful who you let into your heart. Some people wear masks so convincing, they forget who they really are underneath." Imani had always prided herself on seeing through people's masks, but with Julian, she'd missed what was hiding in plain sight, and now she didn't know what hurt more, the lie itself, or the fact that despite everything, a part of her still wanted to hear his explanation. Imani made it through her shift at Cornerstone Books on autopilot. Her mind kept replaying every conversation, every moment with Julian over the past months, searching for clues she'd missed. How could she have been so blind? "Earth to Imani," said Marcus, the store owner, waving, a hand in front of her face. "You've been staring at that same display for 10 minutes. Sorry," Imani mumbled, adjusting the stack of books. "Rough day." Marcus, a kind man in his 60s who'd been a friend of her grandmother's, studied her face. "Want to talk about it?" Imani shook her head. "Not really." "Well, whenever you're ready. Oh, and don't forget about those photos for the community board. The Neighborhood History Project needs them by next week." The Neighborhood History Project. Imani had been photographing long-time Harlem residents and their stories, people like Mrs. Wilson, who'd lived in her building for 40 years and now worried about the rising rent, people being pushed out by companies like Cole Holdings, by people like Julian. When her shift ended, Imani couldn't face going home. Instead, she wandered through the familiar streets of Harlem, camera in hand, taking pictures of storefronts that had already changed owners 3 times in as many years. New boutiques and upscale coffee shops stood where family-owned businesses had thrived for decades. Is this what Julian's family did? Create these changes while people like her grandmother struggled to keep their homes. By nightfall, the rain had stopped, but Imani was exhausted and had nowhere else to go. Reluctantly, she headed back to the apartment, hoping Julian would be out. No such luck. He was sitting on the couch, hands clasped, looking like he hadn't moved since she left. When she entered, he stood quickly. "Imani, thank God." "I was worried." "Don't," she said coldly, hanging up her wet coat. "I just came to get some things. I'm staying with a friend tonight." Julian stepped toward her. "Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain." Imani crossed her arms. "Fine, 5 minutes." Julian took a deep breath. "My father built Cole Holdings into what it is today. When he died 3 years ago, I inherited everything. The company, the properties, the responsibility. I didn't want it. I was working as an architect, designing affordable housing projects." He ran a hand through his hair. "But my father's partners, the board members, they had plans. Development contracts worth billions, luxury condos where affordable housing once stood." "And you went along with it," Imani said flatly. "At first, yes," Julian admitted. "I was grieving, overwhelmed. I signed papers without reading them, trusted people I shouldn't have." His voice cracked. "By the time I realized what was happening, developments were underway across Harlem. Families who'd lived here for generations were being priced out. Like Mrs. Wilson down the hall," Imani said. "Like my grandmother would have been." Julian nodded, his face pained. "6 months ago, I finally stood up to the board, demanded we halt the luxury developments, focus on maintaining affordable units. They fought back, claimed I was throwing away the company's future." He gestured around the apartment. "So I moved out of my penthouse, came here to the heart of what we were changing. I needed to understand what we were destroying." "And me? Was I part of your research project?" "No." Julian's response was immediate. "Answering your ad was impulse, chance. I'd been staying at hotels trying to figure out my next move when I saw your photos, heard you talk about your grandmother, about the neighborhood." He looked at her directly. "For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone real. Someone who saw me, not my bank account." Imani felt her resolve wavering but pushed back. "You still lied." "Yes," Julian admitted. "And I'm sorry. At first it seemed easier not to explain. Then, as we got closer..." He hesitated. "I was afraid of losing this. Afraid of losing you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. "The rent increase," Imani finally said. "Was that your doing?" Julian shook his head. "No. The board pushed it through while I was fighting them on other properties. When you showed me that notice, I spent all night figuring out how to block it." "And did you?" "Temporary injunction," he said. "Filed yesterday morning. It buys us 3 months while I try to permanently restructure the tenant agreements." Imani didn't know what to believe. The pain of betrayal still stung, but Julian's story rang true. The sadness she'd glimpsed in him, the mysterious phone calls, his reaction when she mentioned Cole Holdings. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot," Julian nodded. "I understand. I can stay somewhere else if that would make you more comfortable." "No," Imani decided. "This is my home, and technically I guess it's yours too." The irony wasn't lost on her. "But I need space to think." "Of course," Julian said, relief washing over his face. "Whatever you need." For the next week, they moved around each other, carefully. Julian left early each morning in suits Imani had never seen before, returning late in the evening. Imani buried herself in preparation for the community art exhibit, staying out late photographing artists in their studios. When they did cross paths, conversation was stilted, polite. The easy companionship they'd shared seemed like a distant memory. One evening, Imani came home to find an envelope on her bed. Inside was a letter, not from Julian but from the community gallery. They loved her portfolio and wanted to feature her work in an upcoming exhibit, focusing on Harlem's changing landscape. For the first time in days, genuine excitement coursed through her. She hurried to the living room to share the news, momentarily forgetting the tension between them. Julian was on the phone, his back to her. "I don't care about the shareholders, David. We built this company on the back of this community, and I won't be responsible for destroying it." He listened for a moment. "No, I'm not coming back until you agree to my terms. The board meeting can wait." He hung up and turned, startled to find Imani standing there. "Sorry, I didn't hear you come in. Are you really fighting your board for the neighborhood?" she asked directly. Julian looked tired but determined. "Yes, it's messy and they're pushing back hard, but yes." Imani held up the gallery letter. "I got accepted for an exhibit." A genuine smile broke across Julian's face. "Imani, that's amazing. Your work deserves to be seen." His enthusiasm seemed so sincere that Imani felt something in her chest loosen, slightly. "Thank you." That night, they ordered takeout and sat at opposite ends of the couch, the first meal they'd shared since her discovery. The conversation was careful but less strained. Julian asked about her exhibition plans, and Imani found herself sharing her ideas freely. When Julian's phone rang, he glanced at it and declined the call. "Work can wait," he said simply. "This is more important." The next morning, Imani left, early for a photo shoot. The winter air was crisp, the sky brilliantly blue after days of grey. She was setting up her equipment in a small park when a voice called her name, a voice she hadn't heard in nearly 20 years. "Imani, baby, is that really you?" Imani froze, her hands tightening on her camera. Slowly, she turned to face the woman approaching. Slender, well-dressed, with the same high cheekbones and wide eyes that Imani saw in the mirror every day. "Mom?" Lydia Rivers smiled nervously. "Look at you, all grown up and beautiful." Imani's heart hammered in her chest. The woman who had walked out when Imani was 8 years old, leaving her with Grandma Rose without so much as a goodbye, stood before her as if she had every right to be there. "What are you doing here?" Imani managed to ask, her voice tight. "I've been trying to find you," Lydia said, stepping closer. "When I heard about your grandmother passing—" "I'm so sorry, baby, I should have been there." "You're about 20 years too late for that," Imani said coldly, turning back to her camera. Lydia persisted. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I've changed, Imani. I've been clean for 5 years now. I have a steady job, an apartment in Queens." "Good for you," Imani said, not looking up. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm working." "Please," Lydia's voice cracked. "Just one coffee. That's all I'm asking, one chance to explain." Imani finally looked at her mother, really looked at her. Beyond the fashionable clothes and carefully applied makeup, she could see the lines of hardship, the shadows of regret. For a moment she thought of Julian, asking for a chance to explain his own deception. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "One coffee. Tomorrow at the Cornerstone Cafe at 10 a.m. I have 30 minutes before my shift." Relief washed over Lydia's face. "Thank you, baby. You won't regret it." "I already do," Imani muttered as her mother walked away. That evening, Imani returned to the apartment to find Julian in the kitchen, attempting to cook again. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the small space. "You're cooking?" Imani asked. Surprised, Julian looked embarrassed. "Trying to. I've been taking online tutorials. This one's called Pasta That Isn't Terrible." Despite herself, Imani smiled. It was such a Julian thing to do, methodically trying to improve on his failure. "Need help?" Together they finished preparing the meal, moving around the kitchen with cautious familiarity. As they ate, Imani found herself telling Julian about the encounter with her mother. "She just showed up out of nowhere after 20 years, Imani said. still processing the shock. Claims she wants to explain, to reconnect. Julian listened attentively. How do you feel about seeing her? Angry. Confused? Imani pushed her pasta around her plate. Part of me wants to hear her out. Another part wants to tell her to go back to wherever she's been all these years. What would your grandmother advise? Julian asked gently. The question caught Imani off guard. Grandma Rose had rarely spoken about Lydia, but when she did, there was always a mixture of sadness and hope in her voice. She'd probably say that holding onto anger only hurts the person holding it, Imani admitted. But she also said that trust, once broken, has to be earned back through actions, not words. Julian nodded thoughtfully. Wise woman. I'm meeting my mother tomorrow, Imani said. Just for coffee. Would you like me to come with you? Julian offered. For support, the offer was tempting, but Imani shook her head. This is something I need to do alone. Later that night, Imani lay awake thinking about trust and forgiveness. Her mother had abandoned her without explanation. Julian had lied about his identity. Both betrayals had shaken her foundation. Yet, here she was, considering giving both of them a second chance. Was she being naive, or was this what growth looked like? The next morning, Imani arrived at the cafe early, her stomach in knots. She chose a table near the back where her co-workers wouldn't overhear. At exactly 10 a.m., Lydia appeared, looking nervous but determined. You came, she said, sitting across. From Imani, I said I would. Imani ordered black coffee while Lydia asked for tea. Once their drinks arrived, Lydia took a deep breath. I don't know where to start. How about with why you left? Imani suggested, her voice steadier than she felt. Lydia nodded. I was 22 when I had you. Your father was already gone. I was scared, using drugs to cope. She looked down at her hands. Your grandmother tried to help, but I was too far. Gone. One night I hit rock bottom, overdosed in some stranger's apartment. When I came to in the hospital, I realized I couldn't be the mother you deserved. So you just disappeared, Imani challenged. I told myself you were better off without me, Lydia admitted. That Rose could give you stability I couldn't. I went to rehab, relapsed, went back. This cycle went on for years. She looked up, her eyes wet. I wanted to reach out so many times, but I kept telling myself I needed to be fixed first, to have something to offer you. And now, Imani asked. Now I've been clean for 5 years. I work as an office manager for a medical practice. I have a small place in Queens. Lydia reached for her purse and pulled out a business card. You can check, call my boss, visit my apartment. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. Imani took the card, turning it over in her fingers. Why now? When I heard about Rose, I realized I'd run out of excuses. That if I didn't try to find you now, I might lose the chance forever. Lydia's voice broke. I don't expect you to call me Mum or to let me back into your life right away. I just want a chance to know the amazing woman my daughter has become. The sincerity in her voice made Imani's chest ache. I don't know if I can do this, she said honestly. I understand, Lydia nodded. But I'm not going anywhere this time, Imani. I'll be here when you're ready, if you're ever ready. They talked for another 20 minutes, Lydia asking careful questions about Imani's photography, her job at the bookstore. As Imani prepared to leave for her shift, Lydia hesitated. There's one more thing, she said. I heard you're living in Rose's old place in the Cole building. Is that right? Imani tensed. Yes. Why? Be careful, baby. Word is that Cole Holdings is planning major renovations. They're pushing out longtime tenants all over Harlem. Where? Did you hear that? Imani asked sharply. My boyfriend works construction. His company just got a big contract with Cole to gut and rebuild several properties. Your building is on the list. Imani felt like she'd been punched. Julian had told her he was fighting these developments, that he'd filed an injunction against the rent increases. Had that been another lie? I have to go, she said abruptly, gathering her things. Imani, wait. But Imani was already heading for the door, her mind racing. She needed answers, and this time she wouldn't settle for anything less than the complete truth. She called in sick to work and went straight back to the apartment. Julian wasn't there, but his laptop was on the kitchen table. It was wrong, she knew, but anger and fear pushed her forward. She opened it, and to her surprise, it wasn't password protected. The screen showed an email chain between Julian and someone named David Chen, with the subject line, Harlem Properties Restructuring. Imani scrolled through, her heart pounding. There were plans, budgets, timelines, all for renovating buildings across Harlem, including their own. But as she read further, she realized these weren't luxury condo conversions. They were maintenance upgrades, accessibility improvements, and security enhancements, all with clear stipulations that current tenants would be guaranteed right of return at their existing rent levels. Attached was a legal document Julian had drafted, outlining a new corporate structure for Cole Holdings that would designate 60% of their Harlem properties as permanently affordable housing. At the bottom of the email thread was a response from David. The board will never agree to this, Julian. You're talking about voluntarily reducing the company's value by millions. As your legal counsel, I have to advise against presenting this at tomorrow's meeting. Julian's response was brief. I'm not asking for their permission, David. Either they accept these terms, or I'll liquidate my personal shares and use the money to buy out these properties myself. Meeting is non-negotiable. See you at 10 a.m. Tomorrow's meeting. 10 a.m. Julian was putting everything on the line for the neighborhood, just as he'd claimed. Imani closed the laptop, her emotions in turmoil. Julian hadn't lied about trying to protect the tenants. If anything, he'd understated his fight against his own company. She was still processing this revelation when she heard keys in the door. Julian entered, looking exhausted in his business suit. His tie loosened. When he saw Imani, he paused. You're home early, he said, setting down his briefcase. I met with my mother, Imani said, deciding not to mention the laptop yet. She told me Cole Holdings is planning major renovations here, that tenants are being pushed out. Julian's face darkened. Who told her that? Her boyfriend works construction. Says his company just got the contract. Julian pulled out his phone and made a call. David, it's me. Which construction company did Reynolds hire for the Harlem properties? He listened, his jaw tightening. Without board approval? I want that contract on my desk in an hour. He hung up and looked at Imani. Reynolds went behind my back. He's the COO and has been fighting me every step of the way. So it's true? The renovations are happening? Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Reynolds submitted the plans months ago before I stepped in. I've been trying to block them, redirect the funds to necessary maintenance instead of luxury upgrades. He looked at Imani directly. I have a board meeting tomorrow morning. I'm presenting my alternative plan, one that guarantees all current tenants can stay at their existing rent levels. Imani took a deep breath. I know, I saw your email. At Julian's surprised look, she added, your laptop was open. I shouldn't have looked, but after what my mother said. Instead of anger, Julian just nodded. Now you know I wasn't lying about fighting for this neighborhood. He sat heavily on the couch. But I might lose, Imani. The board has significant power and other shareholders are backing Reynolds. If they vote against me tomorrow, what happens then? Imani asked, sitting beside him. Julian looked at her, determination in his eyes. Then I do exactly what I said in that email. I liquidate my personal assets and buy these buildings outright. He hesitated. But that would mean leaving the company my father built, abandoning the legacy he left me. For the first time, Imani saw the full weight Julian carried, torn between honoring his father's work and fighting for what he believed was right. She reached out, covering his hand with hers. What would your father want? She asked gently. Julian's eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. I don't know anymore. He built the company, but he also believed in community. Somewhere along the way, the business side won out. Then maybe it's time for a new legacy, Imani said softly. One you build yourself. Julian turned his hand to clasp hers. I've missed this, he admitted. Talking to you, being honest with you. The air between them shifted, the walls Imani had built starting to crumble. But before she could respond, Julian's phone rang again. He checked the screen and sighed. It's Reynolds, I have to take this. As Julian moved to the kitchen to take the call, Imani sat back, her thoughts swirling. Julian was fighting for her home, for her neighborhood. He was risking everything he had, and despite her best efforts to keep her distance, she was falling, for him all over again. The morning of Julian's board meeting arrived with grey skies threatening snow. Imani woke to find Julian already dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his hair neatly styled, looking every bit the CEO she'd seen in those online photos. "You're up early," she said, wrapping her robe tightly around herself. Julian looked up from his coffee, tension evident in his shoulders. Big day. Probably should have slept more than 2 hours. Imani hesitated, then moved to the kitchen to pour herself a cup. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Julian's eyes met hers. "Imani, no matter what happens today, I want you to know that everything I've said about protecting this building, this neighborhood, I meant it all." "I believe you," Imani said softly, surprising herself with how true the words felt. Julian's face relaxed slightly. "That means more than you know." He checked his watch and stood. "I should go. The meeting starts at 10, but I want to review some things with David first." At the door, he paused. Would you want to have dinner tonight? Whatever the outcome, I'd like to tell you about it." Imani nodded. "I'd like that." After Julian left, Imani tried to focus on organizing her photos for the upcoming exhibition, but her mind kept drifting to the Cole Holdings boardroom. What was happening? Was Julian standing his ground? Would the board even listen? Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "Can we meet again?" "I have more information about Cole Holdings you should know." Imani stared at the message, conflicted. Her mother's sudden reappearance still felt surreal, and she wasn't sure how much to trust her. But if she knew something about Julian's company... "Where and when?" she texted back. "Riverside Park, 1 p.m, by the stone steps." Imani agreed and arrived at the park 15 minutes early, her camera in tow as always. The cold air bit at her cheeks as she took photos of bare tree branches silhouetted against the winter sky. "You still love that camera, don't you?" Imani turned to see Lydia approaching, elegant in a wool coat, her hands tucked into leather gloves. "It's how I make sense of the world," Imani replied, lowering the camera. "What's this information you have?" Lydia sat on a bench, motioning for Imani to join her. "My boyfriend's construction company just had their contract with Cole Holdings cancelled this morning. All the Harlem renovation projects halted indefinitely." Imani's heart leapt. "What? When did this happen?" "About an hour ago." "Tony?" "My boyfriend said it came straight from the top, from Julian Cole himself." Imani tried to contain her reaction. "Did your boyfriend say why?" Lydia shrugged. "Something about a new direction for the company. Tony's boss is furious. It was a multi-million-dollar contract." She studied Imani's face. "You don't seem surprised." "I've been following the company's moves," Imani said carefully. "They've been making changes in the neighborhood." "Well, the gossip is that young Cole is committing corporate suicide," Lydia said. "Throwing away profits to save old buildings." She looked around at the park. "Speaking of neighborhoods, I remember bringing you here when you were little. You used to love watching the boats on the river." The casual mention of a childhood memory Imani barely recalled felt jarring. "I don't remember that." Lydia's smile faltered. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. You were only 4 or 5. She hesitated. "Imani, I know one coffee and a park bench can't make up for 20 years, but I meant what I said yesterday. I want to be in your life if you'll let me." "Why should I?" Imani asked bluntly. "You left without even saying goodbye. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" Lydia flinched. "I was sick, Imani. Addiction is a disease and I was drowning in it. Grandma Rose would have helped you. She tried to help you." "Your grandmother was a saint," Lydia agreed, "but I was too far gone to accept help. I had to hit rock bottom several times before I was ready." She pulled something from her coat pocket, a small book with a worn cover. "This might help you understand. It's the journal I kept during rehab the last time, when I finally got clean for good." Imani took the journal reluctantly. "I don't know if I want to read this." "You don't have to," Lydia said. "But it's yours, if you want it. My contact information is inside the cover." She stood. I should go. Tony's pretty upset about losing that contract, and I promised to meet him for lunch. As Lydia walked away, Imani called after her. How did you find me? After all these years? Lydia turned back. I went to Rose's funeral. I stayed in the back, didn't approach you, wasn't sure you'd want to see me on the worst day of your life. Her eyes grew sad. You looked so much like me, but you have your grandmother's strength. I saw it in the way you held yourself, even in grief. The revelation that her mother had been there, watching from the shadows during Imani's darkest moment, left her speechless. By the time she found her voice, Lydia was already walking away. Imani sat on the bench for a long time, the journal in her lap, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Finally, she slipped it into her bag and headed back to the apartment. To her surprise, Julian was already there, still in his suit but with the tie removed, pacing the small living room. Julian, what happened? The meeting is still happening, he said, his expression hard to read. I walked out. You what? Julian stopped pacing and faced her. I presented my plan to protect the tenants, to dedicate most of our Harlem properties to affordable housing. Reynolds immediately objected, called it financial suicide, and I expected that. His jaw tightened. What I didn't expect was for him to reveal he's been working with city officials to fast-track luxury rezoning permits for months, using my father's old connections. Can he do that? Not without board approval, which is exactly what he was pushing for today. Julian ran a hand through his hair, messing up its neat style. When I saw the voting was going his way, I invoked my right as majority shareholder to temporarily freeze all company assets. Imani's eyes widened. Can you do that? Grim smile crossed Julian's face. It's a rarely used clause my father put in the company charter. The board is furious. Reynolds is probably having an aneurysm right now. He loosened his collar. I have 48 hours before they can overturn it with a supermajority vote, which they're scrambling to organize. So what happens now? Julian moved to the window, looking out at the Harlem streets below. Now I make good on my threat. I've instructed my personal attorneys to begin liquidating my non-company assets. Properties, investments, art collections, everything. By tomorrow, I'll have enough capital to make an offer on the residential buildings directly. The magnitude of what he was doing hit Imani. You're giving up your family's company for this? Julian turned to face her, his expression resolute. Not giving up, transforming. My father built Cole Holdings to create homes, not to price people out of them. He moved closer to Imani. This morning, before the meeting, I canceled all the renovation. Contracts Reynolds had set up. The construction crews won't be touching this building or any other in the neighborhood. I know, Imani said. My mother told me. Her boyfriend works for one of those companies. Julian raised an eyebrow. You saw her again? Imani nodded, pulling the journal from her bag. She gave me this. It's from when she was in rehab. Are you going to read it? I don't know, Imani admitted. Part of me wants to understand, but another part is afraid of what you'll find, Julian finished for her. His eyes held understanding. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones closest to our hearts. Their gazes held for a long moment, and Imani felt the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling further. This man standing before her, the billionaire CEO fighting his own company, the quiet roommate who'd listened to her dreams, was becoming impossible to resist. I should change, Julian said, breaking the moment. I'm meeting David at 4 to go over the legal strategy. As he disappeared into his room, Imani sat on the couch, the journal heavy in her hands. After a moment's hesitation, she opened it to the first page. Day 1 of rehab, again. The doctors say this time could kill me if I relapse. I keep seeing Imani's face, not as the grown woman she must be now, but as my little girl with her gap-toothed smile, asking when we can go to the park again. I promised her tomorrow. That was 15 years ago. Imani's throat tightened. She flipped through pages filled with raw pain, regret, and gradually hope. Near the end, she found an entry that made her pause. Day 87. My counselor asked what success looks like to me. Not just staying clean, but what I want from life. I told her the truth. I want to see my daughter again. Not to ask for forgiveness I don't deserve, but just to see the woman she's become. Rose sends Christmas cards every year. Last year's showed Imani graduating college with a photography degree. She has my eyes but Rose's determination. I am so proud and so ashamed at the same time. Imani closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. The pain and regret in those pages felt real, as did the struggle. Her mother had been keeping track of her all these years through Grandma Rose's updates. When Julian emerged from his room in jeans and a sweater, looking once again like the roommate she'd first met, he found Imani wiping away tears. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. "She kept track of me," Imani said. "All these years, Grandma sent her updates, photos." She looked at Julian. "Why didn't Grandma ever tell me?" Julian considered this. "Maybe she thought it would hurt more to know your mother was out there, but choosing not to come back. Or maybe she was protecting me until my mother was truly ready," Imani said, recalling her grandmother's wisdom. Grandma always said that bridges need solid foundations on both sides. Julian checked his watch reluctantly. "I need to go meet." "David, will you be all right?" Imani nodded. "Go, save our building." The gentle kiss Julian pressed to her forehead before leaving felt both new and familiar, like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Alone in the apartment, Imani picked up her camera and began scrolling through her recent photos. Images of Harlem, its people, its buildings, its changing face filled the screen. These were the shots she'd selected for her exhibition, capturing both the neighborhood's rich history and its uncertain future. On impulse, she reached for her laptop and began a new project, a photo essay combining her Harlem landscapes with portraits of residents, including snippets of their stories. Mrs. Wilson, who'd raised 3 generations in the same apartment, Mr. Gaines, who ran the corner store for 40 years. Young activists fighting gentrification. She worked through the evening, barely noticing the hours passing, when her phone buzzed with a text from Julian, "Meeting running late." "Rain check on dinner?" She replied with a simple, "Of course." "Good luck." Returning to her work, Imani added one final image to the collection, a photo she'd taken weeks ago of Julian, before she knew who he was. He sat on the fire escape outside their window, his profile silhouetted against the evening sky, his expression thoughtful as he looked out over the neighborhood. She titled it simply, "Home Isn't Money." The next morning, Imani woke to find Julian's Sadko still closed. She moved quietly, preparing for her shift at the bookstore. As she gathered her things, her phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" "Imani Rivers. This is Patricia Washington from the Harlem Arts Collective. I'm calling about your exhibition submission." Imani's heart raced. "Yes? We've reviewed your portfolio and we're impressed. We'd like to offer you a featured spot in our Changing Faces of Harlem exhibition next month." "Featured?" Imani repeated, stunned. "I thought I was just being considered for inclusion." "Your work stood out," Patricia explained. "Particularly, your recent photo essay combining portraits with architectural shots. It tells exactly the story we're trying to highlight." After arranging a meeting to discuss details, Imani hung up, elated. She had to tell Julian. She knocked softly on his door, but there was no answer. When she pushed it open, she found the bed made and untouched. He hadn't come home. Concern gnawed at her as she headed to work. Julian's confrontation with his board was clearly escalating. Throughout her shift, she checked her phone repeatedly, but there were no messages. Marcus noticed her distraction. "Everything okay, Imani?" "You keep looking at your phone like it might bite you." "I'm just waiting to hear from someone," she said, forcing a smile. "Oh, and I got accepted to the Harlem Arts exhibition, featured spot." Marcus's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Your grandmother would be so proud." "Thanks, Marcus. I think she would be." As her shift ended, Imani's phone finally buzzed, not with a text from Julian, but with a news alert. Breaking. Cole Holdings heir Julian. Cole proposes radical company restructuring, creating affordable housing trust. Attached was a photo of Julian at a press conference, looking tired but determined as he addressed a room full of reporters. The article detailed his plan to transfer a significant portion of Cole Holdings' Harlem properties into a community-managed trust that would ensure affordable housing for decades to come. The business world was calling it unprecedented. Housing advocates were cautiously celebrating. The Cole Holdings board was reportedly in chaos. Imani stared at Julian's image on her screen. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. She hurried home, hoping to find him there, but the apartment remained empty. As evening fell, she tried calling his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Where was he? Just after 9, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Lydia standing there, looking agitated. Mom, what are you doing here? Have you seen the news? Lydia asked, stepping inside. About Cole Holdings? Yes, Imani said cautiously. Why? Lydia paced the small living room. Tony's furious, says this Cole guy is destroying the natural development of the neighborhood, costing jobs. She stopped suddenly, looking around the apartment. Wait, you live here alone, right? Imani hesitated. I have a roommate. Tony mentioned that Cole has been living somewhere in Harlem, slumming it. Lydia's eyes narrowed. Imani, please tell me your roommate isn't Julian Cole. The silence answered for her. Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. You're living with Julian Cole, the billionaire. It's complicated, Imani said defensively. Complicated? Lydia looked incredulous. Imani, do you have any idea what you're involved in? This man is at the center of the biggest real estate controversy. In New York! I know exactly who he is, Imani said firmly. And what he's doing. He's protecting this neighborhood, not destroying it. Lydia shook her head. That's not how Tony sees it. He says Cole is just trying to salvage his public image after years of his family displacing people. Your boyfriend doesn't know Julian, Imani said, her voice rising. I do. Do you? Lydia challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're being taken in by a rich man's guilt project. The accusation stung, all the more because it echoed Imani's own initial doubts. You don't get to come back. After 20 years and judge my choices, she said coldly. You don't know me, you don't know Julian. Lydia's expression softened. You're right, I don't have that right, she sighed. I'm just worried about you, getting involved with someone like that. There are consequences, Imani, attention you might not want. As if on cue, Imani's phone buzzed with another news alert. This time, the headline made her blood run cold. Julian Cole's secret life. Heir hiding in Harlem apartment with local photographer. The article included a grainy photo of Julian entering their building and a professional shot of Imani from her photography website. Anonymous sources claimed Julian had been researching neighborhood dynamics by living among those affected by his company's developments. This is bad, Lydia murmured, reading over Imani's shoulder. Tony's construction friends are already furious about losing the contracts. If they think you're involved with Cole. I need to find Julian, Imani said, grabbing her coat. He's not answering his phone. Where would he go? Imani thought for a moment, then remembered something Julian had mentioned weeks ago. There's a place he goes sometimes. To think. She headed for the door, then paused, looking back at her mother. I have to do this alone. Lydia nodded. Be careful, Imani. The night air was frigid as Imani hurried through the streets to the small park, where Julian had once mentioned he went when he needed clarity. It was nearly deserted at this hour, just a few dog walkers and couples hurrying through. She spotted him on a bench near the back, head bowed, looking nothing like the confident CEO from the press conference. In his jeans and worn hoodie, he was once again the quiet roommate she'd first met. Julian, she called softly, approaching. He looked up, surprise and relief washing over his tired face. Imani, how did you find me? You mentioned this place once, she said, sitting beside him. I saw the news. All of it. Julian winced. I'm sorry about that last article. Someone must have followed me or connected the dots somehow. I never meant to drag you into this. Is that why you didn't come home? To protect me from the publicity? He nodded. That, and I needed to think. The board voted this afternoon. It was close, but they've accepted my proposal. Cole Holdings will transfer 60% of its Harlem properties to the community trust. A small smile crossed his face. My father would be spinning in his grave. Or maybe not. I'd like to think he'd understand. Julian, That's amazing, Imani said, genuinely awed by what he'd accomplished. It comes with conditions, he continued. I have to step back into my role as CEO, be the public face of the company, manage the transition. He looked at her, vulnerability in his eyes. No more hiding in a tiny apartment, pretending to be someone I'm not. You never pretended to be someone you weren't, Imani said softly. Your name, your job. Those things aren't who you are. The man who fixed my radiator, who listened to stories about my grandmother, who stayed up late talking about books and dreams. That's the real Julian Cole. Julian's eyes filled with emotion. These past months with you, they've been the most honest of my life. Mine too, Imani admitted. But things will change now, Julian said regretfully. The press will be watching me, watching us, your privacy, your work. I got the exhibition, Imani interrupted. Featured spot. They loved my Harlem photo essay. Julian's face lit up. Imani, that's incredible. When? Next month, and I want you there, she said firmly. Not hidden in the back, not as some anonymous supporter, just as yourself, as Julian. The implication hung between them that despite everything, despite the complications that lay ahead, she wanted him in her life. Julian reached for her hand, his touch warm against the cold night air. Are you sure? The media attention, the scrutiny. I'm sure about you, Imani said simply. The rest we'll figure out together. As they sat in the quiet park, their fingers intertwined, Imani thought about trust and forgiveness. Her mother, Julian, both had hidden truths. Both were seeking redemption in their own ways. Perhaps Grandma Rose had been right all along. What matters isn't the mistakes we make, but how we try to mend them. Julian gently lifted her chin, his eyes asking a silent question. When she nodded, his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like a promise, complicated, imperfect, but real. The vibration of Julian's phone broke the moment. He checked it and frowned. What is it? Imani asked. Reynolds, Julian said grimly. He's not accepting defeat gracefully. He's called an emergency shareholders meeting for tomorrow. Says he has information that will force me to step down. What kind of information? Julian shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it is, I'll face it. No more hiding. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Let's go home. As they walked back to the apartment, Imani felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, from Julian's company, from the press, from her mother's reappearance in her life, they would face them together. But neither of them could have predicted the bombshell Reynolds was about to drop, one that would shake the very foundation of everything Julian thought he knew about his father's company and about himself.